I said it last week. I'm going to say it again this week. There is something different this offseason. We have news coming every single week. We were talking yesterday and we were like, oh my gosh, we have nothing to talk about. And then maybe an hour later, Jonathan Huberdeau signs a massive, massive contract to stay a Flame for the next 8 years, and he hasn't even played a game yet. What the heck?
I don't know what to make of this trade now because, I mean, for anyone that follows us on TikTok, before Jonathan Huberdeau when he got traded to Calgary, but before he was signed, I did not assume that him or Uyghur were going to sign back. And I thought for sure that this was a Panthers win. And after Jonathan Huberdeau signs back, we'll talk about this pretty soon. I still think it's a Panthers win in the trade. I no longer think it's a Panthers fleece. I'm very surprised that Trey Living was able to sign Jonathan Huberdeau back. However, breaking this down into the contract, it was 8 years by 10.5, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Before I talk about it, maybe you tell me. You think it's an overpayment? What do you think about this deal?
Yeah, it is an overpay. I think in maybe 3 or 4 years when he's in his mid-30s. Sorry, maybe I'd say halfway through this deal, he'll start really underperforming the value of the contract. I think what really makes it look bad is that the Panthers were able to sign Tkachuk for $1 million less for the same term, and he's 5 or 6 years younger than him. I think that makes it look way worse. But there are different things to consider. There are different factors at play that might have led to that, but on face value, that's what really makes it look bad.
No, I completely agree with you. I think he's 6 years. I think Tkachuk is 24, and I think Jonathan Huberdeau's turning 30 this year.
Yeah, he'll be 30 at some point in the season.
Yeah, once again, I know a lot of people who listen to us must think that I don't like Jonathan Huberdeau. Let's not get it twisted. He's a top 20 player in the league. He is phenomenal. But with that being said, I still think this deal is an overpayment right now, and it's going to be, like you said, one of the poorer contracts in the league within 5 years. I understand that, especially in smaller markets where it's difficult to attract free agents, that you need to overpay generational type players like Huberdeau in order to sign long term. I fully understand that. He's probably a top 10 offensive player in the league right now. But paying $10.5 million, which it's over 10% of the cap. That's a huge chunk of the cap for a dude that's a downright defensive liability is just mind-boggling to me. And fine, when he's putting up 110 points, you're willing to live with that. Yeah. But you're right. In 4 to 5 years, when he starts putting up 75, 80, and the defensive liabilities become more glaring, and then now that he has a full no-move clause for the first 6 years, you start to wonder this deal's going to turn out to be bad.
It is, and I think I think the Flames probably know that. I think there's a couple of factors at play that really made them be willing to pay this. I think one, they got sort of embarrassed by their 2 best players this offseason. Johnny Gaudreau waited till the last day, which is his right, to tell them, hey, I'm going to move on. I'm going to go to play for a different team. Then a week later, Tkachuk says, I'm not signing here. Trade me, basically. So you got you got kicked in the groin twice by your 2 best players. And I think they just said, okay, we can't let another one get away. We have to make a statement. We have to show that we're not going to get, that this is a desirable place. I think all those factors gave Huberdeau a ton of leverage, and it made the Flames desperate, and he capitalized, which is, again, something that a good agent and a smart player recognize in the moment. He could have waited this whole year and still scored 110 points, but he probably knew right now, if they're offering me 10.5, I can't turn that down, because even if I have a great season, how much more can I expect?
I 100% agree. I'm pretty sure, and once again, we're not Elliot Friedman, an inside analyst of the NHL, but there were rumblings that he had asked initially Florida for the same 8 by 10.5 contract, and then it came out that Florida hadn't given him an offer, and the next thing that he heard from his agent was that he had been traded. So Florida definitely didn't want to pay this deal. It just blows my mind that people are still thinking that Florida lost his trade. Let's break it down a little bit. To swap a 29-year-old defensive liability who got massively overpaid in 4 to 5 years for a 24-year-old top 3 two-way winger in the league who is only getting better. All you had to do was give up Mackenzie Weegar, who, by the way, probably wasn't going to sign back next year, so that doesn't even really count. All you had to give up to make that swap was a first-round pick and a prospect, and Florida didn't win that trade. I don't
It
understand.
depends. I think the way right now, I don't think Florida got better this season.
Really?
They lost their second best defenseman and their best offensive player.
Fine, that's
Right? So
fair.
like
But
on paper this year, and they're in win now mode.
yeah.
They didn't get better, but long term, like you said, they probably weren't going to be able to keep Huberdeau. They might not have wanted to, and they might not have been able to keep Uyghur because he's going to command probably 6 to 7 at least, if not more. He's so good.
And it sounded like he wanted to go to Ottawa this year.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, he would have been open to going home. I believe that. So in the short term, it maybe Florida got got a little worse on paper. They're trying to compete, but I think in the long run we're going to see that Kachuk's going to have an unbelievable 8 years there. I don't imagine him getting worse.
Mm-hmm. What you're saying is kind of interesting because you know what? Come to think of it, I do agree with you, but I think it is possible for the team to still win a trade without getting better, and I think that's what we saw here.
Yeah, they definitely looks like they made a trade with the next 5 years in mind rather than the next one, which is probably how you should be making trades unless you're at the deadline and you're like got Sidney Crosby and Malkin and they're 36.
For sure.
They also don't have any draft picks either. So like if they get better, they're gonna have to get better through free agency or through I don't know who they can even trade now. They don't have assets to trade, so they kind of restricted themselves in that sense. But I guess you can't. We always clamor on for teams to go for it and make big trades, and they've been doing that. They've been keeping us entertained, this Florida team. So I think they, I don't know. They're a mixed bag. I've heard a lot of people say like, "Oh, what's Florida thinking? They won the President's Trophy playing this free flowing hockey, and now they get rid of one of their best defensemen, one of their best forwards, and they get rid of their coach and bring in Paul Maurice."
Mm-hmm.
Where do you stand on Florida this year now?
You know what? This segues perfectly into what I wanted to talk about now. I think that the debacle that happened in Calgary motivated this trade so well because if I am Zito right now and I'm thinking, what am I doing in the next year? What I think motivated this trade is that Zito saw two of the top players in the league leave Calgary after not really expressing an interest in wanting to leave until the offseason. And he's looking at his team and saying, well, I got two massive UFAs next year, but my team is in win now mode. I need to make a run. What happens next year when Jonathan Huberdeau tells me he wants to test free agency? Am I going to be able to trade him at the deadline? If I do trade him, I'll get assets, but I'll probably get fired on the spot because the team automatically is not going to win. But if I don't fire him and we don't win, we're now going to have what happened at Calgary where two of their guys leave right away. So Zito says, okay, let's secure Matthew Tkachuk now, sign him on term. And that's exactly what they did, right? They were able to effectively get a better Jonathan Huberdeau for a lower term and a lower AAV and lock him in.
Yeah, I mean, when you put it that way, on the forward side of the trade, I think you probably trade Huberdeau first and maybe Kolschwin for 8 years of Tkachuk.
For sure.
Huberdeau's declining. At best, that I imagine that first round draft pick, which I think is in 2025 or 2026. We don't know what the Florida Panthers are going to be by then, but I still expect them to be making the playoffs. So at worst, it's like the 16th overall pick, and those are very hit and miss, even though it's still pretty early in the first round. I think something that I've thought of a lot is that, and I used to do this. I used to be like, oh my God, a first round pick, you can't get rid of those. But how many guys, I don't know what the actual percentage is on this, but how many players in the first round beyond, like, let's say the fifth pick, like what percentage of those actually turn out to be solid NHL players? It's probably lower than I think and probably lower than most people think. Just the first round has this sort of like, it's like this sort of like aura around it that like you can't move them because they're so valuable, but maybe they're not as valuable as we think.
No, I mean, I think that first, I think pro sports is on a spectrum. On one side, you have the MLB where literally no first round picks really matter that much because most of them don't end up panning out. On the other side of the spectrum, you have the NFL where first round picks are so important because most of the team is made up by them. And I think the NHL falls somewhere in the middle, closer to the NFL, where I would say most of a roster currently constructed is within the first 1 to 3 rounds. But you always see busts happening. Like
always.
What was it? Uliovi? I forget what round.
Uliovi, yeah, he went like fifth, or I think he went fifth. Kachuk went seventh that same draft.
Right, and then you had a guy like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins who's had a good career for himself, but when he was touted as that number one overall, excuse me for the brain fart, he was supposed to be a generational player, and now he's a third liner, right? So
yeah,
we talked about this with the Kevin Fiala trade. I think all GMs are proponents of trading finished versions of products for draft picks.
Yeah, and I'm kind of coming around to the idea of that too, because especially when you're in win now mode, I think Florida's willing to give up that future prospect to one really play for their team for like, my God, it might be 6 or 7 years before we even see that player, depending on who he is and whatnot.
100%.
So I think it's possible for both teams to kind of do well under the circumstances. I think considering that the Flames had really like no leverage, the fact that they still got a first and two very good NHL players, and Cole Schwindt's apparently supposed to be a guy who can play in your middle six, which is, you know, GMs love those guys.
Mm-hmm.
They trade second, first for them all the time at the deadline for a third line center who can win faceoffs. So I think the Flames did well under the circumstances, but I think in the long run, even a year or two down the road, I think Florida is going to come out looking pretty good.
Oh, without a doubt. But considering the circumstances, like you said, I did not think there was a chance in anywhere that Jonathan Huberdeau was going to sign back in Calgary, especially because apparently he wasn't too happy with the trade. And then Trey Living takes him out for dinner, signs him by 8 by 10.5. You can't say no.
Money talks. Yeah, if you give me 10.5, I'll go play in Nunavut. Honestly,
100%. But here's a question I want to ask you. I'm kind of anxious to see how Jonathan Huberdeau plays in the Sutter system. I mean, you talk about this a lot. Compared to next to Rick Bowness, Sutter's probably the most defensive coach in NHL. No,
I think he definitely has a reputation for that. But we saw last year, like that first line, they all had career years. They all put up 40 goals.
They did, but defensively, they were also one of the best defensive lines in the league.
And I think one of the knocks against Johnny Gaudreau's whole career was that, he doesn't play good defense, which I think was true at the time. And then last year we saw that he was one of the better two-way wingers in the league. So I think he has the ability to do that. Can he make a 9th percentile defensive forward to a 95th? Oh, maybe not. But if you put him into a good system and surround him with good two-way players like Lindholm, and I guess Toffoli might be the guy who bumps up on that first line now, I could see him definitely being decent defensively and still putting up good offensive numbers. We'll have to see how they all sort of gel, which will take time. But I'm a Daryl Sutter fan, so I'm optimistic for, I guess, that component of it.
So I agree with you that I do think his defensive numbers will increase next year. But like, do you think his offensive numbers are going to fall as a product of that?
I don't. Yeah, they might fall just due to regression. Like I don't think he's ever put up over 100 points. So if they fall to 90, 95, that's still a really good player.
Yeah,
so
that's fair.
I don't know if it's fair to expect 110 points every year from him, just because that's hard to expect from any player besides like Connor McDavid.
Mm-hmm.
So they might fall just because he's in a new system. It's going to take him some time. I think he still finds success, though.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I saw all over Twitter a lot of people clamoring about the same thing we're talking about now. Like, you put one of the worst defensive forwards in a defensive-minded system. Is he going to do poorly? And Jay Fresh came out and kind of put that argument to bed in the sense that he brought out a lot of players that had poor defensive metrics and thrived under the Sutter system. Guys like Jeff Carter and Marian Gaborik, we know all too well in the mid 2010 decades. Was like those guys were going off in the playoffs, and both of them were in the bottom quartile of defensive metrics. So yeah, like you're completely right. I do think Huberdeau will fit into this system. It will take him some time, but considering that Matthew Tkachuk wanted out, the fact that you're able to get a top 10 offensive player in the league on term, regardless of how much you spent, is insane to me.
It's still, very good under the circumstances, right?
Before we go, I also want to talk about one more thing. We didn't have this planned, but you kind of sparked my mind with something that you said where Matthew Tkachuk came out and he said, I want to trade. These are the teams that I'm willing to be traded to. We talked about this a little bit off air where RFAs normally don't have too much leverage with respect to number one being traded and number two being traded to where they want to be traded. I think what Matthew Tkachuk did, coming out and saying these are the only teams I will sign for long term, was genius. He basically created a no trade clause for himself.
Exactly, because he had that 1 year before free agency. Because he had a $9 million qualifying offer. He's like, okay, I'll take that and then I'll go play for whoever the heck I want.
Exactly, but not only that, it also in the sense that he's not only secured the fact that he's going to be traded, but he secured the fact that he's going to be traded to one of the teams that he came out and said he'd sign for, right? Because no team is going to give up 2 first-round picks for a guy that's going to play a year, right? But now that a team knows already that he's going to sign long-term, of course they're going to sell the farm for him. And I wonder if this is going to start a trend now, because I've never seen this before, if big-time RFAs or big-time UFAs with like 1 year left on their contract come out and say, I want to be traded, these are the only teams I'm being traded to for.
I wouldn't be surprised. We see that all the time in other leagues. It doesn't happen exactly like this in the NBA, because in the NBA they'll say 1 year into a 4-year contract that I want to get traded, circa Kevin Durant. But I think we're going to see it. I think hockey players for a long time have never been sort of player oriented, like the league in itself. As fans, like I think from a fan perspective, you don't like it because you know that the best player in your team at any moment can be like, yeah, okay, I'm done here. Please trade me. But I guess if you're a pro player guy and you want to see the players like live the lives they want to live and make their money where they want to make their money, then this is a good thing. But I just hope it doesn't go as far as the NBA goes, because there's just zero loyalty there. And I think as fans and as people who are fans of the sport and have been for their whole life, we value some loyalty. Right? Could you imagine if like Matt Sundin, when we were like 10 years old, said, "I'm leaving now"? We would have been heartbroken.
You just never heard that back in the day.
No.
Players just played where they were playing, and that's it.
They knew, they kind of stayed in their lane, but I think they're kind of figuring out that they have more power than they think, which is dangerous if you're a GM, and also dangerous if you're a fan, especially of like let's be real here, like smaller market teams, they always get kind of the raw deal when it comes to like big players wanting out.
No, I completely agree with you, and I'm kind of interested to see whether big time UFA starts saying this, because we've already seen a lot of UFAs coming out and saying, "No, I'm going to test free agency," but we have never seen a player say, "I'm testing free agency and this is where I'm signing." And I just think it's genius. I think it's absolutely genius
from their perspective.
It's like
absolutely
borderline tampering on your own behalf.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content, and find the link to our full podcast and all our socials in the description down below.
Also, don't forget to turn on those notifications to get live updates on new videos that we release.